All right, folks, millions will be watching tonight the State of the Union address, not just on broadcast and cable television, but also on their pads and phones as well. And so we'll certainly see what the president will address. The question is, what do you want him to address? Send me a tweet at NewsOne or at Roland S. Martin, and I just might read here on the air. You can also go to our Facebook page as well. Let's go back to our panel. Sophia Nelson, Cleo Manago, Lauren Victoria Burke, and also Jason Jonhson. And so what else jumps out? What else jumps out that the president should talk about?
Talk about terror, given what happened in France. Certainly, I imagine he's going to probably open with it. And ISIS has a new video out today that's very disturbing with the two Japanese gentlemen that they're threatening to behead if they don't get $200 million from Japan. So I think he has to talk about the terror threat. I think given what happened in France last week and the threats that they've had in Europe, America has to be very concerned about, are we next and what happens.
But you know what, Joe? You know what? I think for somebody sitting at home,
no way.
I think somebody sitting at home, he's going to mention it, but I think that this is not a hardcore economic State of the Union address.
He needs to bring up rising tuition costs and domestic issues.
That's not something that's a real concern. Now, if the president wants to speak about it in a more philosophical sense, I'm serious, in a more philosophical sense, if he wants to say connect that to what happened with the interview and say, look, as an effect of being the President of the United States, we have to make sure that people have the right to express themselves, whether that's in a movie that's offensive or whether that's in cartoons that are racist. If he wants to make a general argument, that's fine. But I agree with Roland. He should be talking about our economy. He should be talking about human rights issues. He should be talking about prison reform. Look, he could say Charlie Hebdo 12 times. I'd appreciate if he says something about Boko Haram. If the president's really going to be talking about international issues, I'd like him to focus on things that are slightly more substantive.
I don't think he should talk about international at all, because when we start talking about these other countries and human rights and we skip over things like Ferguson, that's a big mistake. It's very glaring. You want to get domestic again, talk about tuition, talk about rising tuition. Obviously, he's going to bring up his 2-year free community college issue. Then you segue into tuition costs. But surely he is going to mention terrorism, but I keep that thing domestic.
To mention terrorism than criminal justice.
I do.
Really? Yeah, you're probably right.
And
that's right.
His function under the Constitution is as commander-in-chief, and that is like his main duty, to be honest with you. Domestic, I don't read any of that in the Constitution, and so his job is really to protect this nation, and I think terror is going to be mentioned prominently. I bet everybody dinner here, and I'm paying that's mentioned very prominently.
Oh, I'll bet he mentions that more than Ferguson.
You can, and I don't think Ferguson gets mentioned at all.
Yeah.
I think he talks more broadly about, the issues that we talked about, but I don't think he's going there.
Well, I think in a way, and this is the next to last, it's the next to last State of the Union, right? I think he's also going to be teeing some things up for 2016, which means I do think he's going to be talking about some of those issues. He's got to, this is his last chance to speak to the coalition that he built over the last 6 years to try and help out Hillary or Biden or O'Malley or something else like that. So I can't imagine he's going to ignore hundreds of thousands of people who've been protesting across the country.
Exactly
He's going to say something.
This is the White House that told us for 4 years that they couldn't bring up any race issues because they were going to do it in the second term. Well, it's the second term now, and you're second to the last State of the Union. You can say whatever you want. So if you can't talk about race now, when can you talk about it? There's always some reason not to talk about it. At some point, it should be talked about. And I'm tired of the excuses or the reasoning or, well, he can't really talk about that. He can do whatever he wants. You're the President of the United States. You can do whatever you want.
He doesn't want to.
Well,
right.
That's deep, that he can do anything he wants, but he won't talk about race. I mean, I keep saying that there's a resistance from the president to be direct about race because of concern around association. So we'll see what happens, but I can't imagine him using this position to talk about race issues.
And Sophia's going to be right. It's going to be more terrorism. No mention of Ferguson.
Perfectly candid. Look, the president talks about race quite a bit, just not in ways that most people find to be particularly helpful or substantive. That's the issue.
That's not helpful
all the time. He's just talking about.
That's not helpful. A passive-aggressive, unclear, abstract approach to racism, might as well not even talk about.
It's actually not that abstract. If you look at his speech at the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, there was nothing abstract about that. Unfortunately, that was not an abstraction. And that was, I thought, one of the lowest points for him with regard to referring to race.
Well, I'm talking about helpful referrals to
community college, what the president would say is community college is very helpful to people of color, especially working class and poor.
It is, but the way Roland couched it as we open with the sentencing and the criminal justice, I do believe that he does need to talk about that. And I think the community college, it's innovation, it's job creation, it's education. That is the way to lift our communities up. And hopefully he can talk about race, not in ways we all want him to, because we want him to just go there. But he's not going to do that.
Right. Yeah.
He's not going
to
do
He
that.
did drop $15 million for, $25 million for HBCUs the other day. He should plug Norfolk State. Norfolk State is having some accreditation problems. They're leading that. So he should plug Norfolk State. That would be nice.
Well,
Cleo, go ahead.
I was going to say, this, fantasizing is always frustrating. I like constructive, practical application, and I'm getting frustrated with the fantasy stuff about him saying, "Yeah, I gave a HBCU several $1 million, and I want to get a shot."
I'm not saying he's got to come out in a dashiki and a big afro wig.
Well,
I'm just saying that he's got to say a few things.
But I feel the same way. I mean, you know, he can play Nat X and Luther the anger management person all he wants, but at the end of the day, I agree with you. Substantive and practical things matter. As an academic, when I look at this college tuition plan and the idea of free community college, again, I think that's a lifting all boats situation. People of color will be helped, poor people will be helped, et cetera, but you got to tell me how to pay for it. And that's one of the issues that I've had.
All that is hopeful, but because at the risk of sounding selfish, black self-concept drives everything in terms of ultimately the quality of our lives. So when things are abstract, even when people get money in an abstract situation, in terms of self-concept, there's no benefit if you're not unless you're direct about the importance of black lives in this country.
Also, the last spending bill he did dropped $1.6 billion for Egypt, and we're sitting around talking about how we can't pay for 2 years of community college. I mean, I know it's astronomically expensive, but we drop money on other countries like crazy, and then we can't find money for our own people right here. There's something wrong with that.
I think you're raising a good point, though. It's as we are Selma 50, and we are, looking back at those who sacrificed so that all of us could do what we do and have what we have. I think you're talking about the will here, and it is interesting. The President of the United States finds himself in an interesting conundrum that he has from day one, which is every time he's talked about race, Skip Gates, anything else, he gets whacked for it.
Well,
and I think
it's always a whack approach.
Well, you're right. Well, okay. But I'm just saying that ultimately, I think they are still not comfortable at this White House on how to talk about it yet. They don't know how to go there without alienating the mainstream of America and the broader white America that just doesn't see black lives the way all of us.
But like somebody said, he's in his last leg
of his presidency.
But
I'm telling you,
this is a fantasy again.
It's a fantasy,
There's
but
things he can do now without worrying about losing the vote.
If a Southern president can get up there and say, "We shall overcome" in 1964, with what was going on in the background, yeah, okay, he was a white man. It's different. It was still tough to say for a Southern president. It caused a complete reorganization of the Democratic Party, and we know it. But he still did it.
Right.
He still did it. So
don't,
just because he's white doesn't mean, okay, he's not brave. He still did it.
Right, but that also has to do with the general concept of political will. This is not what President Obama does. I guess part of this for me is I don't know why people keep trying to project onto him a man that he has never been. So you have to be happy with who he actually is.
Who he actually is.
I mean, if we're going to stay in Teddy Riley's fantasy, we can fantasize about what kind of man Obama's going to be, but it's clear that President Obama is a minimalist. He's a pragmatist in his own mind, so he's not going to do some radical, amazing thing that's going to change people's lives.
This is not radical. To mention Ferguson is not radical.
Well, speaking of radical, I'm paying some bills. So we come back. I'm going to chat with Deborah Owens about the economic issue the president should be dealing with. Of course, she is America's wealth coach. We'll deal with that when we come back. News One Now on TV1.